Alex groaned as he regained consciousness, his senses slowly coming back. He was lying on the ground, and the throbbing in his head was unbearable. When he tried to open his eyes, the sunlight pierced through his lids, sending sharp pains through his head and into his already muddled brain. Any attempt to stand was thwarted by the spinning world around him. Sitting would have to suffice for now. Where am I? Did I get plastered last night? He muttered, thoroughly confused. Squinting, he looked around, trying to clear the haze in his mind and understand his surroundings. He found himself in a grassy clearing within a strange forest. Glancing down, he realized he was completely naked. His first thought was that his friends had pulled an elaborate prank on him. Rolling onto his right side, he managed to stand, though the rush of blood to his head made him dizzy again. He stood still for a few moments, eyes closed, waiting for the spinning to subside. When he opened them again, he took another look around. The trees were unfamiliar, as was the grass at his feet. "Hello? Anyone here?" he shouted. But there was no response. Only birds chirping and taking flight from nearby trees, and some creature screeching deeper in the woods broke the silence. Unsure of what to do, he started inspecting the area more carefully, searching for any clues. His clothes, footprints, tire tracks, a path, anything. But the grass was untouched except for his own footprints and the imprint of his body. It was as if he had been dropped there from the sky. Looking up, his jaw dropped in astonishment. There were two suns in the sky. Rubbing his eyes, hoping it was just double vision, he looked again. Sure enough, two yellow suns shone brightly down on the clearing and one bewildered human. An hour later, his headache had mostly subsided, and his thoughts were clearer. He recalled being on a merchant ship traveling from Earth to the colony on Arcadia. The last thing he remembered was their ship being thrown out of hyperspace, alarms blaring, and then darkness. He was an accountant, not an engineer, so he had no idea what could have gone wrong. Clearly, he was on an alien planet. There was no wreckage around, no injuries on his body, and someone had removed his clothes. If this wasn't an alien abduction, he didn't know what was. Feeling more cautious, he scanned his surroundings, half expecting little gray aliens to appear from the tall grass. He decided to explore the edge of the forest, looking for any signs of life or a way out. He figured staying close to the clearing was wise. Whoever had brought him here might return. They had put him on a breathable planet, after all, so they must want him alive. But why take his clothes? Reaching the far side of the clearing, he heard the faint sound of water. Following the sound, he found a small creek running through the forest. He approached it cautiously, squatted by the water, and tested it with a finger. It seemed like normal water. He cupped some in his hands, smelled it, slightly earthy, but nothing alarming, and took a sip. Despite his thirst, he only drank a little, deciding to wait and see if he felt any ill effects. Without realizing it, Alex had shifted into survival mode, thinking about water, shelter, fire, and food. Before leaving the creek, he collected some rocks to make a hearth. Returning to the clearing, he stayed closer to the forest and creek, away from his initial waking spot. He looked up to see if the suns had moved, trying to gauge the time. Both suns had shifted slightly, but he still had plenty of daylight. "All right, Alex, you can do this," he encouraged himself. "You've watched enough survival shows and read Robinson Crusoe. You can make it through this." He reasoned that a search party would find the ship eventually, and this planet must be near their crash site. Whoever or whatever had saved him might return. He just needed to survive until then. 3 days later, he had made some progress. He built a lean-to at the edge of the forest, lined with dry grass and leaves, and fashioned a grass skirt for modesty. He had tested some berries and fruits, finding them edible, and the water seemed safe. The night before, he managed to start a fire using dried wood, like in the movie Castaway. Today, he was attempting to make tools, chipping away at a flat rock to fashion a blade. Though his hands ached, he finally produced a passable sharp edge and placed it beside a bola he had made earlier. In those 3 days, he had only seen birds and insects, noting about 10 species ranging from sparrow-sized to geese-sized. He planned to hunt for protein, opting for a bola over a spear to increase his chances of success with the larger birds. Stretching after his work, He froze when he saw a flock of big birds at the opposite side of the clearing. They were enormous, resembling a cross between big bird and an ostrich, with grayish feathers and colorful plumes on their heads. Their legs were powerful, their bodies pear-shaped and inclined forward, and their heads and beaks were like those of shoebill storks. Alex's stomach growled at the sight of potential food. He glanced at his bola and club, then back at the birds. Carefully, he crouched, not wanting to scare them. He watched as they spread out into the clearing, grazing or hunting insects. There were 11 of them, with an apparent alpha male in the center. Checking the wind direction, he planned his approach. Keeping low, he slipped into the forest, circling to the right to stay downwind of the birds. His goal was to flank them and bring down the one on the edge, using the forest for cover if things went wrong. 5 minutes later, he was ready to execute his plan. Marcus crouched silently, hidden among the last trees on the right flank of the strange bird-like creatures. They moved slowly in a loose formation, nearly in a line, and were now in the center of the clearing. "Let's do this," he thought, steeling himself for the hunt. He lowered himself further, creeping through the grass toward the nearest bird. When he was about 10 paces away, he stood up slowly and began swinging his bola. The bird heard the noise and turned its head towards him with a surprised croak. Unlike earthbirds, it didn't flee immediately. They must not have any predators, Marcus speculated, and released the bola with a strong swing. The weapon struck the bird, wrapping around its neck. It squawked once before collapsing to the ground, its feathered wings, which had small talons at the joints, flailing uselessly. As the other birds turned in alarm, Marcus charged towards his prey, waving his club and shouting, "Shoo! Shoo! You overgrown turkeys!" The closest birds scattered in panic, but the alpha male screeched angrily and charged to defend its fallen comrade. "Damn it, big birds got guts," Marcus thought. He briefly considered retreating to the forest, but decided against leaving his catch to suffer a slow death. Starving, he resolved to face the alpha. Gripping his club with both hands, he braced himself. The alpha leapt at him, talons outstretched. Marcus stepped aside, swinging his club down hard, striking the bird's legs. The alpha landed awkwardly with a screech of pain. Marcus quickly followed up with a blow to its head, ending its life. Turning towards the rest of the flock, he screamed again. This time, seeing their leader killed, the other birds fled in terror. Breathing a sigh of relief, Marcus returned to the bird entangled by his bola. It was barely conscious. He knelt beside it, placed a knee on its neck, grabbed its head and beak, and with a swift, powerful twist, broke its neck. Meanwhile, aboard the cruiser Steel Talon, the Bari War Council watched in horrified silence. The planet below, designated as a Special Forces training facility, was where they tested tactics and trained their troops. When they discovered humans, they chose to observe rather than initiate contact, looking for weaknesses. They had captured Marcus from a merchant ship and dropped him on the training planet, observing his behavior for several days before sending an elite squad to hunt him. The initial reports were uneventful, but the last hour had been a nightmare. The human had taken the Bari by surprise, attacking the elite squad alone. None had expected such aggression. When Marcus felled the first warrior with his primitive weapon, it was almost excusable as a surprise attack. But when the squad leader rallied and charged, only to be killed swiftly, the council was stunned. The cold-blooded execution of the first downed warrior horrified them. The satellite feed had no sound, but they all imagined the crunch of the warrior's spine as Marcus broke its neck with his bare hands. They watched in revulsion as he dragged the bodies back to his camp and began plucking their feathers. Why? Why would he desecrate their corpses? A young captain asked, disbelief in his voice. The desecration continued as Marcus gutted the bodies. Many council members vomited at the sight of him up to his elbows in their entrails. Though they wanted to stop watching, they felt duty-bound to witness the horrors a war with humans might entail. Marcus built a rack from branches and methodically stripped flesh from one of the corpses, setting the strips on the rack. When he started a fire and began roasting the meat, the council members were numb with shock. General Croth, a seasoned veteran, weakly croaked, "Perhaps the beast is conducting a funeral rite." But his words died as Marcus cut a piece of meat and ate it. The senior general mercifully turned off the screen. The council sat in stunned silence. This is madness. I will not send even one of my soldiers against that thing. I've never seen such cruelty. War with the humans is out of the question. We must avoid them and warn the other races, the senior general declared. The council unanimously agreed, deciding to seal the recording to prevent it from demoralizing their troops. Suddenly, the screen flickered back to life, this time showing an angry human in military attire. This is General Kane of the battleship HMS Hound. May I ask what in the name of the Almighty you had in mind when you attacked one of our merchant ships?